The civil rights movement of the 20th century was the epitome of an era for anti-discrimination and pro-segregation activists alike. The war raging on both sides of the topic was reaching an ultimatum, causing many important individuals in society to make an important decision of whether to remain politically neutral on the objective or to take a side. President John Fitzgerald Kennedy was an influential public figure who, at first, held fundamentally neutral views on the issue, but then later shifted his opinions to further his support of civil rights. Although not completely involved with the single side, President Kennedy enacted lukewarm actions which did not completely demonstrate a need for racial justice, but also did not communicate aspects of the opposing ideas. His actions during the last few years of his term had a far greater effect on the road to equality and resulted in opening the eyes of a nation to the dire need for civil rights.
Kennedy was the second of 9 children, his parents being of Irish descent. Kennedy was ill for most of his childhood and did not play as much as a normal child would. He turned to books for something to do and was always deep into his reading. Despite being an avid reader, he was still only an average student. He was rebellious, unorganized, and sloppy, yet still attended both Princeton and Harvard universities. He was a hero when his warship hit a Japanese destroyer and split in half. 2 crewmen died, but he managed to gather the remaining group, 2 of whom were badly injured, and they all swam to an island, where after many days they were rescued. This event helped him start his political career, as he became a U.S. congressman from the state of Massachusetts. He was re-elected twice, and then in 1952 became a member of the Senate. When he decided to run for presidency in 1960, he chose Lyndon B. Johnson of Texas as his running mate to satisfy the Southern voters. This later turned out to be a smart choice and helped him gain the presidency.
Kennedy was essentially caught in a dilemma. Despite his wishes to advance the situation of African Americans in the South, he was not willing to give up what little political influence he had over the heavily segregated country. In October of 1960, the president made a call to the wife of Martin Luther King Jr., consoling her after her husband's arrest and pledging his support for their cause, gaining him the votes of the majority of the African American community. The concept of affirmative action within employment was introduced by the president, creating the Committee on Equal Employment Opportunities. Kennedy also made attempts at integrating schools in the South during his term. But when Kennedy failed to introduce a civil rights bill in 1961, movement leaders were disappointed. A test to his allegiance was introduced when the Freedom Riders were attacked while attempting to end segregation in bus terminals, and when mobs of angry whites tried to prevent an African American named James Meredith from being the first colored individual enrolled in the University of Mississippi. Kennedy's decision to prohibit train companies to use segregated facilities and to mobilize the U.S. National Guard for the safety of Meredith reflected his change of position into one of a more positive view on the issue.
During the spring of 1963, peaceful protesters were savagely attacked by policemen and vicious dogs while attending a civil rights movement led by Martin Luther King Jr. Images of this attack shocked and disturbed the nation, probing Kennedy to put aside his political dilemmas and call for government to assume authority for the advancements of rights for African Americans. After the peaceful integration of the University of Alabama, the president announced his intentions to create a comprehensive civil rights bill, which expanded on the rights for African Americans. This bill would include guaranteeing all citizens equal access to public facilities, challenging, but not completely outlawing, the denial of black voting rights, and giving government authority over matters of school integration. Despite the many improvements, many critiques to the new bill were regarding the lack of lawsuits for civil rights violations and prohibiting discrimination in areas of employment. Kennedy responded by expressing his belief that a stronger bill would have little chance of being passed in Congress. The bill was finally passed in the summer of 1964 in the wake of the assassination of the president, and after hundreds of Americans marched on grounds of the U.S. Capitol to awaken the nation to the issue of civil rights.
President John Fitzgerald Kennedy in Houston, Texas last night, vibrant and alive, looking forward to the future, now dead, felled by an assassin's bullet in Dallas, Texas, as he continued his tour of that southwestern state.
John Fitzgerald Kennedy was one of the many politicians who struggled to decide between their morals and what would gain them votes. Initially, he was prone to acting cautiously and almost detached on the civil rights issues, but then gradually realized that it was his responsibility to take initiative and action into progressing the fight for African Americans to gain their full constitutional rights. It was this paradigm shift which played a part in escalating President Kennedy to a figure of influence and respect in one of the darkest but most prominent times in American history.
I hope that every American, regardless of where he lives, will stop and examine his conscience about this and other related incidents. This nation was founded by men of many nations and backgrounds. It was founded on the principle that all men are created equal, and that the rights of every man are diminished when the rights of one man are threatened.